In a world where space and time are intertwined, one man dared to challenge the status quo. His name? Dayton Miller. His weapon of choice? A flute. But not just any flute. This instrument held the power to unleash the ether, a pervasive medium once thought to fill the universe. Miller, a physicist by trade, a musician at heart, discovered a harmonic resonance within the ether. He found that his flute, when played with precision, could manipulate this elusive medium.
All right, hello and welcome everyone to Ether Cosmology Roundtable number 74. Today we're going to be doing an update to Battle of the Beams. After all these months, I think it's been about, 6 or 7 months now, there's finally been a thought out presentation done to try and refute Battle of the Beams. So we're going to take a look at that and look at some of the key points that were put forward, primarily two arguments. So we'll cover those. And we'll just go ahead and get into it. All right, so I got that screen shared for everyone. All right, you guys said you could hear this for sure?
I cannot hear it. Did you play it?
Yeah, can you hear it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good? Okay.
I can hear it.
It's
cool,
a little low.
Oh, yeah, I was just testing it out. Okay, we'll turn it up a little bit and we'll go to 17 to when the Prezi starts. So, quick notice, let me give these guys a link here. So if you guys are interested in watching this, the full Prezi, honestly, it wasn't that bad if you just kind of, take it for what it is. But he goes into some cool technical details, that stuff that I haven't gone into, and I actually learned some stuff throughout from the Prezi. So definitely check his out. It's pretty decent. So anyway, we'll go through here now and lay out the argumentation. 50. All right, so here we're going to see the last updates to this was from Dave McKeegan, who did a follow-up on a Globebusters video that I had done. This was like early on in the Battle of the Beams when we were putting forward the research that we had come across. And there were some mistakes made that were corrected by McKeegan, primarily the attack on Derby being cited as a successful bombing run at night. That wasn't the case, and so that's been since forth corrected. And a couple of other details from that. And so we're going to see this is supposed to be the addition to McKeegan, where he's going to break down the physical mechanisms or the mathematics that explain the refraction and diffraction amounts necessary and how it's going to preserve the beam geometry in such a way that it allows a plane to fly line of sight over it to target. So here we go, lads and ladettes.
Of Newton. Well, this is my refined level, but like this is my for a great understanding about how these things work. This is just my wheelhouse. This is my this is what I do. This is what I've done. This is kind of like I can take it one step further. Besides just saying, "Oh, it's diffraction," I can show you how it diffracts and why it diffracts. So
Nice.
it's. I don't put it in the same level, but let's talk about it's like general relativity is a refinement of Newton. Well, this is my refinement of McKeegan. Let's look at it that way.
All right, so we heard it here first, lads and ladettes. He's not just going to say the words diffraction and refraction. He's going to show us how it's done. That's cool. I'm super looking forward to that. And quick history on this guy. He was in the Navy. He specialized in signals and cryptography. He is currently an engineer, he says, and that's about all we get for credentials. As we go through the Prezi here, he will reference the credentials throughout, but that's just his qualifications and background on where he's coming from when he was talking about, this is my wheelhouse, etc. So this is from his area of expertise, as he says. So let's go ahead and continue it out from here. So that's the introduction to the gentleman here. He's making specific claims on how his presentation is going to be different than McKeegan's. Continue here. All right, so this goes into the radio wave propagation type, the frequency specifically.
VHF and UHF frequencies. Now, when we talk about the radio band, the military specifically uses HF, UHF, and SHF and higher frequencies. The reason why we don't use a lot of VHF is that's where all the licenses are for the FCC. Mm-hmm. But B, it's also because it's a shoulder band. It can sometimes act like HF and be reflected off the ionosphere, which the UHF doesn't. And sometimes it acts like UHF and that it's almost directly line of sight. So
Now-
it depends kind of like where you, and the funny thing is, I mean, you're in IT like I am. There are no absolutes when it comes to radio. Everything is like gray areas. It's more like a speed limit on the highway. You can go over it in rare occasions when you know there's no cops. So, you know, it's kind of the same mentality.
Nice. So let's kind of go back a little bit on that. The different types of radio waves that are used and how he was saying it's kind of a gray area. Well, the way that it's defined is, you know, they have like specific quote unquote cutoff thresholds for what constitutes as very high versus ultra high, etc. Right. But sometimes those waves within certain thresholds behave like the lower classification or the upper classification, depending on different variables. So there's no like clear cut and dry, this is what it is, this is, or whatever, because when you get into the VHF for the 30 to 300 megahertz, some people will say that that's that ends up being UHF based on certain characteristics on how it's being applied. So you get into this mixed match of like, we don't really know, or we have different classifications, but they all kind of behave differently under certain conditions. So that's kind of the guideline that they're going with there. Now, VHF though specifically is line of sight. It doesn't diffract well. It doesn't refract well. It does refract, but not super good. And it's when it gets physically blocked, it's over. It doesn't diffract and come out and bounce over things very well as they would need it to do if the Earth was a globe, when we get into the specific beam propagation for Battle of the Beams, because we're not dealing with an omnidirectional beam that can be just refracted and diffracted. We're dealing with specific beam geometry created by two overlapping lobes that create an equisignal that facilitates a specific geometry that a plane has to fly through. So that's not going to be able to be maintained if there's Earth curvature or things blocking it based on the frequency type. And even still, based on the elevation of the radar towers, they're not gonna, or the navigation beacon towers, they're not going to be able to overcome Earth curvature there. And we'll get into the specifics of how they try to represent how it overcomes Earth curvature versus what the actual argument is to maintain the beam geometry necessary.
Well, did he specifically show that diffraction, or did he just say it super ooper with confidence or whatever?
Super ooper with confies.
Oh, all right.
All right, so let's skip to 21 here.
That was a really long-winded explanation where he just said the same thing, but mine's better, right? He was like, McKeegan says it diffracts. I say it diffracts, but I'm better. Moving on.
I mean, I don't want to spoil it, boys, but he certainly got me amped up to have a physical mechanism and some math behind it. See how that goes. All right, so let's listen to this.
So, but I watched them, so you don't have to. But actually by Taboo Control 6, if you count.
Kind of a fallacy is that?
found this.
Caltrax appeal to douchebaggery or what?
No, hold on, wait. This is extremely important here. Let me let him get his full thought out here, because he's going to preface that he's watched all of the prezzies on Battle of the Beam so that the audience doesn't have to, and he doesn't want to straw man anyone's position. So that's why he went through all this tenuous research to watch all of our content to make sure that it's accurately represented here. So this is him laying out the preface to that, which we will be recalling later.
The globe, right? It's been used everywhere on social media, at least on X, since August when they found this. There are no less than 4 videos, well, 6 if you count McKeegan's, on YouTube. And the first of it was actually by Taboo Conspiracy, published 3 years ago. Now, I've watched all these videos, some of them multiple times, because, I don't want to be accused of being a straw man.
It's not how that works.
But I watched them, so you don't have to. But I know our community well. If you want to do your own research, they're not hard to find on YouTube. I'll just say that.
Awesome.
Couldn't even link us.
I mean,
just linked
unlucky.
you, bro.
Unlucky.
Without even thinking about it. Whatever.
All right, so let's see here. So remember, guys, he's watched all this stuff so that we don't have to, so that it can be accurately represented here. Thank God, Globularist has taken it upon himself to accurately represent the positions of a contrary belief system. This could be the first time in history, lads and ladettes. And so we're going to move on to the specific claims about how the the navigation beacon system works. And imagine you could manually punch in a number for the timestamp skip. Oof. Come on, YouTube. Get it together. All right, here we go.
The Luftwaffe. They also say it's, even though Wikipedia says it's more or less line of sight, by the way, not just Wikipedia says that. Every radio manual says that. No. According to Alan, it is direct line of sight.
Thank you, Alan.
We'll come back to that in a minute.
This dude is having a great time, bro. That was so funny. The way that he
one of them
said,
drunk, or are they both drunk?
ooh, so here's the thing. I think this guy started before this guy, because this guy seems way less junked, and this guy seems way turned up. All right, so let's do a quick recap here. The Lorenz system is a blind landing radar system, or navigation beacon. Sorry, my terminology is a little skewed there. It is a navigation beacon definition. And what that means is it emits two signals from it that you can, two lobes of radiation, and they combine in the center where they overlap. They both create a coherent tone that when you're in a plane and you're in one of the lobes, you'll hear a different sound than when you're in the center. And you can know how to get to the center based on what tone you hear. So if you need to go more left or more right, whichever signal you hear on the left or right side of the center, you'll know to go more left or right to get to the center so you can hear the coherent tone. This is how you land a plane at night, or when the conditions are such that, it's impossible to see. You don't have any visibility. Blind landing system. So you were in this radar system the entire time. You were being guided by a coherent beam that is constantly emitting a pulse that you're picking up because you're inside of that beam. And that is guiding you so that you know where you're going. You're not more or less in the Lorentz beam when you're landing a plane. You are in the Lorentz beam. It is line of sight. The way that they're phrasing it to present it like it's more or less line of sight, as if there's a possibility that it's not used in direct line of sight, because that's the way that they have to try and skew it to make it seem like that's a reasonable position that you could use. The only way this system will safely land you is if you're in it, not more or less in it. That's going to be the important distinction here, because you're not going to know when to drop your bomb unless you are in the equisignal. You're not going to hear.
But he said more or less. He said Wikipedia said more or less.
That is the word magic that is used specifically. All right, so let me see where the next portion is here. All right, so this thank you, Alan guy, thanking me for no reason, and back to beam last. We can keep going here for a couple seconds. Actually, that was it. All right, yeah. So,
because it's direct line of sight and because it hits the horizon, the bottom of the radio signal will be clipped. So therefore, the center of the beam, as it hits the horizon, is now the bottom of the beam. Is basically what they're inferring.
Ooh, so
Whoa.
After 6 prezzies, that is not the position. The entire beam would be blocked. So you can either take a tangent to the horizon if you say that you have vertically polarized beams that are, making it such that it's not being physically obstructed by Earth curvature when it comes across it. So if that's the case, then to preserve the beam geometry so that it can be flown through, you're gonna have to take a tangent to the horizon. So that's the distinction there for what's being put forward. Not that the bottom half would get cut out and then it would still work, or whatever you're trying to say. And he'll go back and reference clipping throughout this Prezi. Not clipping. It would be physically obstructed by what's called Earth curvature at a specific distance, which we'll come to later on in the Prezi. All right, so we can see. We can actually play this out for a couple of minutes. I will put it on 1.25 speed, though. See if that's too fast. Let me know.
I'll show that in a second.
Okay.
And the last one is that Kinnegabine had pinpoint accuracy, resulting in untold damage. They quote, smoked
You may be
the
full screen it.
Rolls-Royce plant, and to rubble basically.
Wow.
And we're going to address that. We'll address.
Yeah. Addressing it after I've addressed it in 6 subsequent presentations seems a little weird to act like we haven't addressed it. But we're going to find that the entire argumentation is going to be hinged on the accuracy and the misspeak on this claim that I made, and calling into question the measurements themselves for the beam geometry that we have, irrespective of the fact that we have the literal technical specs for it delivered from the Telefunken company who made the system for the Germans, which wouldn't change our calculations by very much. All right, so let's continue here. 7, yeah, we can go to 20.
Each and every one of these things, not to worry.
Okay.
So now the next 2 slides are the crayon drawings created by the Aether cosplayers as part of their proof. Not to worry, we'll revisit this again. We'll also, some of these I've actually converted into text, so it's a little easier to follow because this way your eyes aren't jumping back and forth here. But the specific things I kind of want to point out here is just going to be that this is the horizon. And because of the horizon, you see that the signal just continues as a straight line. So I guess they think this is a string, or I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things that are kind of hard to understand as far as
Well, specific beam geometry would have to be preserved. So if it gets clipped or hits Earth curvature, gets obstructed, then it can't end up on the other side of it. So this would be the only reasonable option to maintain the beam geometry, which is the important part of this. And in addition to that, the crayon drawings, right? This is about the mathematical distinctions between playing that tangent out to preserve the geometry versus, where it would put the beam at altitude versus where the bombers had to.
what they believe and not believe.
Mhm.
But
Let's skip to the correction on the radar system versus navigation beacon. This is an important distinction, and thank you for this correction.
let me just kind of set the record straight here and kind of like maybe set the stage for their understanding of this topic. It is not a radar. It has nothing to do with radar. Radar implies that there is a reflected signal and a receiver that can say, hey, that's how far it is.
Okay.
Knickerbein had no receive capability only. It was transmit only, specifically.
Okay.
Now, this might be pedantic, but I'm just trying to set the stage and set your expectations of your understanding of this entire thing. I guess this could be kind of poisoning the well, if it weren't true.
I don't think that's a poisoning the well. I think he just corrected the... Or was he... never mind. Was he saying that based off of this, that the rest of the presentation I would have no idea what I'm talking about? Is that
Yes, exactly that. Yeah.
Okay, that would be poisoning the well.
Did anybody really think it was radar? I mean, it was beams leading it there. If it was radar, they would...
I mean, I was just using the word radar because it's just like... It's just familiar to me, but I know that it doesn't work in terms of like sending the signal out and receiving back. It's one way only. So the proper terminology correction, it is pedantic or whatever, but it is important to name it properly.
Yeah. That's pretty weak, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, when you're wrong about something or whatever, that actually matters. Give it its proper credit. All right. See here, we'll go to 29, 20. Oh, we're already here. Nice.
But yeah, anyway. So the crux, this is where we start getting a little more fun here. So the crux of their arguments and their calculations is based on RF measurements, as I said before. Now, what are these RF measurements? Well, in June 21st, despite skepticism from the entire war cabinet, that 28-year-old physicist, R.V. Jones, somehow convinced Churchill of the existence of Knickerbein. Churchill immediately ordered that all efforts be made to locate the beams and, if found, develop countermeasures.
Mm-hmm.
Simple. So Jones had the idea of the prime target for the Luftwaffe, the Rolls-Royce manufacturing plant that we talked about, where it was the backbone of the air defense for Britain that Germany needed to basically squash so they can start a land invasion. Now, on a cloudy night of June 21st, an Avro Anson, which is this plane that you see right here, with an air crew consisting of Flight Lieutenant Buffton and Corporal Mackey, took off from RAF Winton and flew north.
All right, real quick before we continue on with the authorization to get the measurements, it sounded like he was a little unsure or how, what did he say? How Jones, well, I have to go back and listen to that.
That Germany needed to basically squash so they can start a land invasion. Found, develop countermeasures.
Right. Here we go.
And June 21st, despite skepticism from the entire war cabinet, that 28-year-old physicist, R.V. Jones, somehow convinced Churchill of the existence of Kinnickabine. Churchill immediately ordered that all efforts be made to locate the beams and, if found, develop countermeasures.
All right, so after 6 presentations, the man should know exactly how R.V. Jones convinced Winston Churchill. It wasn't the arguments of geometric Earth curvature or for or against it. It was the circumstantial evidence. Jones didn't just randomly decide, or didn't intuitively decide that Derby would be like the most primary target. Obviously, it's an important factory. It's going to be high priority. That's going to be the first assumption. How he actually determined it was there was an interception of the Enigma transmission, and when it was decoded, the only part of it that was decoded was 3 words. It was Kinnickabine, Cleve, and Stolberg, and each one of those had the corresponding latitude and longitude coordinates with it. So they knew exactly. Oh, and it had Derby on it. So it had the target where they were going to be intersected at, and then it had the 2 locations of the radar systems, the navigation beacon systems themselves. So it's not that he just went in there on a whim and was like, "Look, boys, there could be anything," or something, right? This was very specific, and he actually enlisted the aid of a man named E.T. Eckersley, who was a famous radio wave propagation lad at the time, who gave him some supplemental calculations to add to his explanation onto how it would be possible for this radar system to work on a globe, because a couple of years, actually 2 years prior to Jones going through all this, the British intelligence had proposed that they would use the same exact Lorentz system, doing the same thing the Germans ended up doing, but they ended up not doing it because they determined that it wouldn't work due to Earth curvature based on their calculations. Now, it's said throughout the Prezi here that the reasons that the Germans had an upper hand with this radio wave frequency technology is because the British weren't familiar with it, and the Germans were super invested in high frequency. But that's not the case. Because the countermeasures that end up being employed were all radio wave systems that they already had, and they just had to use the very high frequencies from it, and they were able to jam the signals successfully and trick the pilots and basically create pseudo equisignals that would lead the pilots astray. So this idea that that Jones didn't, that this was all on a whim or something, it's very specific to how things played out. And also there was also even more circumstantial evidence that was found, but we don't even have to get into all that. But either way, the end result was these men were authorized to go take measurements of a potential beam that would be crossing the path at a specific point in the sky based on the latitude and longitude coordinates of the navigation beacon and the assumed target, Derby, where they intersect at. Okay, so we'll get into the measurements now. Actually, I'll just let this play out for a couple minutes because he kind of goes through the whole history of it now.
Simple. So Jones had the idea of the prime target for the Luftwaffe, the Rolls-Royce manufacturing plant that we talked about, where it was the backbone of the air defense for Britain that Germany needed to basically squash so they can start a land invasion. Now, on a cloudy night of June 21st, an Avro Anderson, which is this plane that you see right here, with an aircrew consisting of Flight Lieutenant Buffton and Corporal Mackey, took off from RAF Winton and flew north. Due to the secrecy, because this is intelligence, by the way, they were given very little information. They were only told basically to locate transmissions with a Lorenz-style characteristics. And he gave them the frequencies to look in. Now, as with most things in the intelligence world, luck basically plays just as much as a role as tenacity. And as luck would have it, the beams are located. So I said we're going to revisit these claims over and over again. So here's the flat Earth claims in the House of Cards that it's based off. And I'm going to highlight the specific ones that we're going to go over. So here we're going to talk about the calculations at Spalding. So to understand kind of Kinnickabine and how it mattered, basically, is there was a critical knowledge gap of the radio spectrum between Britain and Germany leading up to World War II. Germany conducted significant research and experimentation with what we call VHF now, or what they called shortwave then. Britain instead concentrated its research and development on lower frequencies like HF, or high frequency, which is the band below it. Mm-hmm. This is the range of ionospheric propagation. You can bounce things off the atmosphere. And it was also the same frequency range of their home-built radar system called Chain Home. Appleton, which is one of their leading scientists at the time, actually got a Nobel Prize for his work on the ionosphere. And it led to obviously untold advances between then and now. Now, because Britain's research was kind of, mainly confined to lower frequencies, the RAF did not actually have access to radio receivers or transmitters in the frequencies that Knickebine were in. So, to accomplish the goal and fulfill the order from Churchill to go locate these beams, Jones had to resort to purchasing civilian, US-made Hallicrafter S-27 receivers from Webb's Radio in Soho and modifying them to throw into the Anson airframe. Now, we're talking about it's now gone from AC to now it needs a new power supply for DC. And it's basically being strapped to a shelf at this point. And just to emphasize this point further, when it came down to the developing countermeasures, there was no transmitters either. There were no transmitters that they could basically buy off the shelf. They had to use modified medical devices that emitted high frequencies to treat pain and muscle conditions.
Really?
I mean, look, in wartime, MacGyver takes hold, right? You know, you do whatever you can. So literally, they took these things that were used for, for managing pain and muscle conditions and said, hey, these are using the frequencies we need. Now we're just going to take the transmitter, we'll push them through this amplifier, and now, out it goes.
Yeah, make it work.
Hey, look, in wartime, look, there is no pretense of wartime except survival. So you do what works, basically, is what happens.
Well, that reminds me of the Gilligan's Island episode where Professor makes a shortwave radio out of a coconut.
Exactly. Exactly. Coconuts for everything.
Anything for the Jewish bankers in a wartime.
Maybe they think that's what this is. 2 strings and a coconut, and that's how this works. I mean, that would make sense. I mean, it's just a really long wire that they're rolling out. So when they located the beams, Lieutenant Buffton came back and he filed a flight report. And the report basically stated that the first beam was located near Spalding, actually and that's where the map is here that you see, and at an altitude of approximately 5,800 meters, and it was measured to be 400 or 500 yards wide. Then a second beam, because this is what's required for Knickebine, is actually makes an X over the target. You have 2 different beams, and where they intersect now becomes the target area. So the second beacon was located with the same characteristics or similar characteristics, not the same because it was different frequency. Was located near Beeston, which was right about here, about around Nottingham. Now, Robin Hood was not part of this by any means, so we don't have to worry about that. So, but here's the question. Should we really call these measurements? I mean, to be honest, let's think about this. How was the signal measured? It was measured by some guy with with headphones on and a pilot who's guesstimating his ground speed on a cloudy night. What variables did they account for? What did they have a device that actually measured signal strength? None of that is known.
Okay.
So how much more equipment did they throw into this airframe that they didn't have access to make a measurement? But let's look at some of the variables that.
All right, so that's important. That's a pretty fair thing to say. They didn't know their ground speed with respect to how fast they were, with their airspeed. So the timing difference there, they're just kind of guesstimating. Now, with that said, their measurements correspond to well, actually, they're a little bit less, but they're within the range of the technical specs of the beam divergence at those distances. So they were, if anything, they might have undershot, but the beam geometry, if you put it out to their maximum tech specs for the 0.3 degree beam divergence at that distance, then it's not gonna matter that much. Like, it's still gonna be useful. And the same problem that he just listed with not knowing your actual true ground speed is the same problem with why the system wasn't as super accurate and had pinpoint accuracy. It relied heavily on pilot skill and timing because of that. That's why the ex-Garage system, which was able to take the timing differential when the signal started, or when you first hear the first equi signal versus when you pass the next one, it'll tell you, how fast you're going to complete that, and then you will know when to drop your bomb before the target based off of a timer. So, a mechanical clock timer that handles all that. So it takes the error and, adds more precision because the human error gets taken out of it. But the same situation in terms of why wasn't this accuracy perfect and all that? Well, pinpoint accuracy may have been an overstatement by me, but comparatively to the British, when you look at the Butt report, they smoked the British in terms of accuracy and ability to hit target. So let's not get carried away here. But so this is the big contention here, right? This is what he hinges all of the argument on, is the measurements, right? The measurements were possibly different at this location. They could be different. Well, we have the Telefunken document that gives us the measured tech specs even at a lower altitude and further distances. And we know that the beam divergence doesn't exceed 0.3 degrees. So this is kind of like, this is nothing. This is absolutely nothing. To be, I mean, I don't, there's not an actual contention here that's meaningful, because even if we
You sifted through the slop and there's no actual argument in the tin.
Dude,
There's nothing actually left.
Dude, shout out to Galatrax, who really sifted through the slop to an insane degree, so that we didn't. Dude, he did the slop so we didn't have to, or whatever. But the reverse of what this guy did, like actually doing it to a T. So yeah, this is what he's hinging it on. Maybe it was possibly different. Okay, well let's just say it was 2 tech spec that was delivered from the Telefunken company. Okay, doesn't change much. Still the same problem. So now we're gonna move on to some other points here. 235. I'm gonna go to 4234. One tap.
Wow. You're good.
Flawed. I mean, you could say asinine. You could say stupid as hell. I mean, take your. I'm glad we're on the same. And would you base that on your, if you were to say
measurement or observation? So here's the thing, lads and ladettes. The gentlemen were in an airplane with a radio receiver tuned to the specific frequency that was coming from the Yermans. And when they were flying in the signal horizontally, right, like laterally across it, right, all of a sudden they go from hearing nothing to hearing beep, and then when they don't hear beep anymore, they just see how much time passed from when they first heard beep to when they stopped hearing beep. If that's not a measurement, like, I don't know what is. Now, if you want to argue the accuracy of it with respect to ground speed, for sure, I'm with you, dog. Great point of contention. That's 100%. However, right, we have the beam spec documents that show the divergence relative to the distances that it is away. And even if that was, giving them like more benefit of the doubt than they were actually capable of, the actual tech specs of it wouldn't affect it that much. So there's no argument here. Like, this whole thing, and he goes into like all this room, all this noise. How could he even hear? I mean, dude, you're calling in that he's trying like, be making it about like the signal strength. Could he hear it or not? Like, how could you determine when you're not hearing it, when you're just hearing noise? I mean, dude, irrespective of any of that, what was measured and what was plain trigged out of that completely works with the tech specs of the beam at its maximum divergence. So I think we can play this out to 45. All right, here we go.
Yeah, it could be measurements, or would they be accurate measurements? And would you base that on your globe-killing silver bullet proof?
Nope.
Okay, I'm glad we're on the same page.
Yeah, Bredimus in the chat says, appeal to beep fallacy. That's what's up.
So, this is...
He made his laugh have meaning.
So now that we talked about how they, they're using these measurements as a basis of all their things and why that's, let's say, fundamentally flawed. I mean, you could say asinine, you could say stupid as hell. I mean, take your pick. Be creative.
I'll say. I'm not very creative, but I do have some. I was trying to think of something clever, but let me just go.
Actually, why don't we just not let you think of anything clever, and we'll just.
Dude, I was trying to be clever, and then I failed.
Yeah. Why don't we just get a mulligan on that and see where we're at here at 45, 49.
All these things, kind of put it in text form to make it a little easy. I also looked at, listen to their videos, watch their videos, and kind of put things together to kind of come up with their claims as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Then, like, still managed to not do it, though, correctly, huh? That sucks.
Now, I hate reading slides. But for all intents and purposes, I'm going to kind of go over this just because I want everyone to understand what it is. Now, what we have is we have the claims on the left, and we have my questions, or what I would say a reasonable amount of questions should be on the right. Mm-hmm. Now, so if we go back, remember they said optical line of sight is 31.36 miles. I use metric for whatever reason, but they don't want to do that. So they gave us a tower height of 200 meters because the benefit of the globe, right? Because we need a benefit. Reality needs the benefit to make this work. So the curvature
Dude, you always give the benefit of the doubt to your boys, plus or minus, right? Is that was I wrong to plus or minus the globe, lads?
Would clip the radio waves at the optical horizon, which means the center of the beam would now be the lower limit of the beam, and the airplane had to be in the beam to listen to it.
So again, not that it was to clip out just the bottom part, right? It would be, if it did somehow overcome Earth curvature in that way, it would be incoherent. It would bounce back. It would interfere with itself. There would be pseudo equisignals. It wouldn't be what it once was. You certainly wouldn't be able to adjust the beam geometry after that point. That's the significant part of this that isn't really being discussed and isn't being touched over, because we were promised physical mechanisms, lads and ladettes. If we recall back to what was put forward at about what would that have been, about 23 minutes ago, 25 minutes ago. This lad promised us physical mechanisms and more than just math. Well, let's see where we're at here.
It also, now this is where things get really weird.
Okay.
I need you guys to think of this in a 3D model. So there's a horizontal width, right? There's a horizontal part of the beam, and there's a vertical portion of the beam. So when we talk about diffraction, well, diffraction affects both of them. When the electrical field or the polarization of the signal is vertical, it's called vertical polarization. And then there's a horizontal polarization. Where the electrical field is polarized kind of acts how things like diffraction and refraction work, and how the signal is basically diverges from the transmitter. And we'll get into this a little more, but I just want you guys to think of this in a 3D space. And we know how well flirts work in 3D spaces.
Not well.
No. So they assume in part of this that it is a symmetrical signal, meaning that if it's 400 to 500 yards wide, that means it should be 400 to 500 yards tall. But then you go on social media and all of a sudden someone counteracts that, because that's what flirts do when they understand a subject, is now it's unlimited height, but it's still only this wide.
So
Wow.
the equisignal specifically is all that matters, that overlapping intersection point. How big the lobes are that create the equisignal at those distances is completely irrelevant. We've never made an argument that it's fixed at certain dimensions symmetrically or anything like that. This is about preserving the beam geometry.
So we'll address both of those, but it's like, can you guys pick one, please, so we can kind of go off this?
Mm-hmm.
Can any of the radio signal experts understand how the system works, or no? Is that too much?
And then they specifically said, when they're talking about Derby and stuff like that, which is their target, is that based on the distance and based on their calculated, based on the RAF measurements of 400 to 500 yards wide, it would have a beam divergence of 0.066 degrees. Now, I'm surprised they didn't add another 6 just to be pedantic about it, because, our favorite number. Yep. Hail Sagan. But they're saying this is the beam width. And they go on to say, well, even though that the Luftwaffe source document said it's only a 0.3 degrees, which is, significantly wider, that's the upper limit. So it could be down here. But yeah, their proof is those same measurements that we just took apart, like Legos.
He took the measurements apart by Legos, right? By
Missed that
showing,
part.
dude, it's literally, so it would just be twice as big at that if it was the maximum dimensions. So instead of being 500 yards, it would be 1,000.
The center of the beam would be 18,000 meters with a total of 12,000 meters above the maximum ceiling of the bomber. And it would require a refraction value of almost 0.8, or basically 5 times the radius of the Earth. Now, let's pause for a second. If it's 5 times the radius of the Earth, if it's not flat, and we're talking about that it's 5 times the radius of the Earth, let's say the Earth is just larger. Not that it is. I'm not a concaver or anything else like that. Don't get me wrong. But that doesn't imply flat, does it?
No. It implies there has to be some curvature there.
So,
Dane, what do you think about that?
What?
What? Dude.
Doesn't imply flat and implies curvature mathematically from what?
Dude, so they're like, oh yeah, we could just 5x Earth radius. That doesn't mean it's flat. It makes it exponentially more flat relative to your location. You're having less curvature between you and the thing you're observing.
Didn't our boy John just do like a to scale model of curvature for the celestial theodolite and had to marvel to himself publicly thrice about how insignificant it looked at that level. That's why he had to blow it up 15 times. And they're saying that you can 5x it and it's no less negligible. Less negligible.
Wouldn't it? Yeah. Here. But anyway, it's always about the equisignal. Just try to remember that. That's the whole point of this, and the ability to adjust the equisignal, because the navigation beacon has a vertical dipole alignment that is able to be adjusted in such that it makes a U shape or a V shape, which will adjust the width of the, which will adjust how the lobes intersect with each other, which adjusts the beam width. So all of this has to be done line of sight. Otherwise, you lose the ability to adjust the equisignal after it becomes diffracted, incoherent, or bounces, or anything like that, or gets obstructed. You lose that ability to adjust it.
So what evidence is there? So here's where the questions go. What evidence is there that HF frequencies do not refract? It does.
No one's ever said that they don't refract. And in fact, the Telefunken company, in which this guy is even referencing and goes over later, so I know he's read it, talks about how refraction conditions during the summer and winter don't vary that much, don't affect the system that much, because they had predicted that it would give significant variance, and it didn't matter at all. But no one's saying that it doesn't exist or have an impact on it.
What does the real world need the benefit of the doubt for measurements when we can actually use the real measurements?
Maybe he's getting drunk now too.
See, this is where I'm confused. We have the actual measurements, and we also have the tech specs to make sure that the measurements at least correspond or don't exceed the tech specs, right, at that location. Because if they exceeded it, that'd be weird, right? But they're within it.
And what scientific evidence is there that curvature clips the radio signal? There isn't.
There you go.
Indeed. Right. The fact that it still works after all the Earth curvature that it would have overcome, it either didn't get clipped by Earth curvature or obstructed by Earth curvature.
Is there a
can you full screen that? I can't read any of that slide.
Oh, yeah. Here's the thing. If I full screen it, it's not gonna.
Do you not have precise control over timestamps? I was thinking that.
No. This is a separate Linux issue.
Oh, okay. All right. I didn't know that was that gay. That's fine.
Sorry. Did you say something? There's a Linux issue.
Continue.
It has to do with screen sharing and full screen. All right. We'll continue on here. But Galatrax has the slide on his Discord. You can always reference it. All right, so I think we're about done with this section. It's all just hinging it on that argument, which, it hasn't gone anywhere yet. And so far, we're nowhere closer to a physical mechanism. And then he calls into question about me good faithing the globe by making the calculations easier on myself just by adding like a uniform height to everything. Apparently we don't need to do that. And then he goes over 1 hour, 4 minutes. So here he circles back to my benefit of the doubting to inquire about some potential malicious behavior or something.
Dated 5 May 1940, and it's titled.
So what we're looking at here is a document that was recovered from a pilot that had some classified information about the Knikabine system on him that he wasn't supposed to, and he's going to give a breakdown of what we're looking at here. Then he's going to try and assert that I benefited of the doubted the globe to give it elevation higher than where this gives more divergence or whatever, where it wouldn't work on a globe from this distance. It's like, buddy, it already doesn't work back there. Like, let's anyway.
The navigation use of the long distance transmitters. Now, if you see the shape of the usable region, don't worry, we're going to come back to this. Okay, I just want you to just kind of familiarize yourself a little bit with this. So what we have here is this is the transmitter here. What we do is we have basically distance across the bottom, we have altitude across the top, and up here to use the same x-axis here for the distance, we have the beam width if you're looking from the top down of the signal. So say it was a light. You could see how wide it is. So at like 200 kilometers, we're looking at roughly 1 kilometer wide, you know.
Mhm.
And it says that the beam width is 0.3 degrees. And again, you know, this is what they're taking it to. Now, this is secret. You know, this was classified. It was not to be taken in the aircraft. So radar operators were known to take notes because, you know, reasons.
Yeah. There's memory is shit. Yep.
Yeah, especially when you're in an airplane surrounded by a bunch of noise and you're trying to bomb somebody and you're getting shot at. You know, things happen. So let's zoom into the far left corner. Now, I took the same thing from the last slide. We have 84 meters, 35, 41. We also have the Aether cosplayers, their horizons. And we have the Stolzberg Hill, which is another site that there are only 2 sites operational during this time that created this. There's a third site, but it was kind of pointing more towards Spain and Italy, and it wasn't really useful in this aspect. So I marked the heights here to kind of zoom in. So this would be the optical horizon for Stolberg. This would be the RF horizon of Stolberg. This is the optical horizon for Cleve. This is the RF horizon from Cleve. And according to their 200 meters benefit of the doubt measurement, this is the optical horizon, or this is the horizon that pertains to for, you know, their benefit of the doubts and everything else. Now, why would they use 200 meters? Oh, look, the line's starting to diverge.
Yeah. Look at that.
Wait, let's give them 200 meters just because we have the benefit of our, you know, the goodness of our hearts. They need it.
I love the clown.
Buddy.
He really doesn't like that part. Huh? That really hurt him personally. I can
Dude.
feel the butthurt radiating off him from that one.
Dude, so crazy. It's their, like, that's it. Yeah. Anyway, that's, this is what he's put forward for that this was a ruse to make it be where it diverges from so that it doesn't work. Okay.
That's, I don't.
It's literally incoherent. All right, so let's get into the second claim yet, because we haven't still don't have any mechanisms or math yet throughout this thing for how the diffraction or refraction, what values, what do I need to input, what gradient is necessary, anything like that. So let's take a look at the next debunk of what we put forward here. All right. So again, remember, this man has watched our prezzies 6 times plus, give or take, right? All the subsequent corrections on this exact thing. This is not where we're hinging our entire argument on. The system was used throughout the course of an entire year, pretty much every day, with a success rate that was higher than the British, who were not using this system, who were mocking the Germans for using the system until they got audited. And you could read the butt report, which is on the Battle of the Beams Wikipedia. You can go and check that out. They weren't even close. They had like they were. All right, so here we go. We'll let this play out.
But basically the question is that if this had the amount of accuracy that the Flurf said it did, right?
Pinpoint.
It would be an easy target. This thing should have been rubble. But yet there's been no reported damage to this building outside that day bombing. And there's been no reported damage to the Derby rail yards outside of, you know, ever.
Right.
And we're talking about several hundred acres. Okay. So
Here we go.
Here we go. So the advantage of doing your own research is looking for source documents. And again, like I said, that website that I used of that Dutch person who was a big fanboy of the S27 receiver and did all this research, he literally found all this shit in microfiche at the German military archives. So it is on microfiche that you can actually get scans of and everything else. And I have the PDF versions of it. Let's go over some of these now. What do you think?
Let's do it.
So, but
this dude acts like he's never seen an 800 PDF deep library before or something. So proud of his one PDF that he found or whatever. Dude.
Oh, sorry, my mic was muted. Yeah, dude, we went through all that and then extrapolated everything from it. And then now he's attempting to do the same. It's cool that he's very excited about it. All right, so that's really all that comes out of this is the accuracy on this, right? So the first attempt, now we talked about earlier he mentioned that what Churchill said, you know, deploy countermeasures if you happen to find the beam signals. So what were the countermeasures? Operation Starfish and Operation Aspirin. Aspirin was the jamming signals, so they were shooting off the same signals frequencies horizontally, just shooting them out, and then those would intersect with the German signals, and it would cause them to be led astray. And then the second part of that operation was Operation Starfish, which is where near the highest value targets they would set up a burn site, essentially, that when a bombing would start, they would ignite this burn pile, and it would be filled with a bunch of stuff that's going to be smoldering ruins and cinders, so that it can be seen from 20,000 feet at night up in the sky. And then the Germans would think that that's where the target is, and then they would drop their bombs on that smoldering ashes, thinking that that's where they were going to hit it. Because remember, they don't know their ground speed. They do have the signals, but they still have to get the timing right, and that's more of a skill issue when it comes down to the pilot. It's going to come down to the pilot, how accurate or not you're going to be on that. And then also, are you going to trust your timing and signal noise, or are you going to look down at that sweet red smoky fire down there, and you're going to go, oh, there it is. I'll just drop, I'll just drop it when I get about to that location. So that's going to be what aided in reducing the accuracy of the system in terms of that. And that was actually deployed on the Derby attack. By the time the Germans attacked Derby that first night, the British already had Operation Starfish countermeasures deployed. So again, we're not hinging our entire argument on just that one attack, right? And that's what he makes the whole case out of. And then he goes on to say that the calculations for explaining this propagation on a ball with diffraction and refraction are more than just math. It's an art form, and that when you get into it, it's actually a bunch of complex math that is what he says. So it's not just math, but then he just goes, it is just complex math, and then he never even references said complex math throughout the rest of this Prezi. Never gets into any specific details or mechanisms of how it would work. This presentation is no different than McKeegan's Battle of the Beams video, where he just goes, oh, diffraction. These guys are looking at this like an omnidirectional AM, FM radio wave thing that doesn't matter. This is not the case. This is two overlapping beams to create a specific geometry. Now, there was a really good point in here that was pointed out that I want to see if I can slide to before we get to the end. It was back here then. So this is in regards to the vertical polarization and the propagation itself. So he gets into these two pictures here. The one that we primarily use is this one, but this one right here is significant. And you see how there's a section here at the bottom that is more red and extends out further, right? So this is going to be the vertically polarized part of the signal that is underneath here, that is keeping it propagated, like that keeps it propagating. So this is how, like, irrespective of globe or flat earth, this is how you get something to propagate horizontally over distance. So this, when he goes on to make this distinction about this bottom lobe being the vertically polarized ray and how we never differentiate between the two. Okay. Thanks for the clarification on that. That's great. This is not model dependent, right? This is how it would work either way, because you still need that signal, because we're only starting at, 100 meters off the ground for the radar system, with respect to whatever the elevation would be too. So this is how you would do it either way. There's no mutual exclusivity here, but I wanted to go back on this because this is an interesting technical point on the vertical polarization aspect of it. But this does not allow for like he was saying, like, okay, if it gets clipped out at the bottom, right? Well, I wouldn't even argue that it would get clipped at the bottom. Or in the middle. I would argue that the whole thing wouldn't make it over. Or more than over half of it wouldn't make it, which would make it completely useless. But with that said, the only way to make this work to preserve the beam geometry and make it still so you can adjust it after it's been overcoming Earth curvature from diffraction, then you would have to have it follow a tangent to the horizon to do that. That would be the only way. So that's why those specific claims are made in the way that they are, because we are trying to keep the system useful to how it was actually used as a line of sight system, not more or less line of sight. So here we'll come to the end now and get to the conclusions where MC Toon shows up to add some additional commentary.
Subs or memberships, my bad. Jeep and Reefer, Carl Christensen, Christoph gifted memberships. Thank you.
Oh, I'm at the wrong side.
Hey, what's up, Toon? How you doing?
Hey, all right, I'm live, and I got to get you on my screen.
All right.
So give me a second.
No problem.
Your latest debate.
That was pretty low, but I have a better understanding of what all that actually, like, there's a lot more that goes into it than other than like, oh, it's direct light or direct sight. That's how it works. But
Right.
It's literally it. It's literally only how it works. Because you'll notice that Guy McGuyerson didn't tell us any specific mechanisms. He just said two specific words, refraction and diffraction. Never provided any math mechanisms or explanation for it.
Oh, to be fair,
Well, you know-
McToon came in on that debate and he pointed to the book and he said diffraction really confidently as well. And he said it 2, 3, or 4 times. So I think they agree on that position.
You know what was awesome about that book is it didn't say anything about diffraction. Mike
Not one
Jones
thing, yeah.
downloaded the book, Control F'd it. It's not even anything in there in regards to that. There's like a little cliff note.
The
It
same
doesn't
thing
say
with the other
anything
book.
about- Doesn't say anything about the way Toon was trying to use it, how he held it up and was like, I have this book. I'm appealing to me reading this book.
But that's
Which
why
part-
he agreed super hard with that guy who was just like, oh, it's harder than that, right? He's like, yep, I sure said the same thing multiple times.
Nice beast. That's hilarious.
You know what? And I'll make this presentation, and I'll make everything else available on the Unfornicated Google Drive, and I'll drop links in your Discord server, Mike.
perfect.
Well,
Yeah, because I want to put it in the description of the
PDS,
video. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. So, Toon, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, I didn't watch the whole presentation, so I will definitely need to review it.
Yeah.
But I did see, I saw just as I was setting up, I'm like, let me listen in. So I was clicking around, and I heard a few things, and I mean, I know Dave actually set me straight in when we were in not Antarctica, in Punta Arenas.
I brought that up actually.
Yeah. So I had, based on some stuff, that thought that it was reflecting off the ionosphere, but after looking at it more, like it couldn't have done that. The angles are wrong. They would have the bouncing would have been too far away.
Wow.
Also, just bouncing in general makes it not line of sight, not usable for a plane to fly through to target someone for hundreds of miles.
Maybe McKeegan
So-
pointed that out for him too.
Yeah, dude, it took McKeegan to tell him. He was like, psst, yo, bro, it don't,
Come here. Yeah.
that's not going to work. They're right. He's like, oh, word.
Well, and on top of that, when we do things like in cryptology and SIGINT, we do things like HFDF as part of the Navy. When we do HFDF, it does bounce off the ionosphere. So there is a certain algorithm that we use to correct, which was actually first postulated and published by Eckersley of all people, about having to
In the 30s.
right, exactly, to account.
Oh, no way. You mean the Eckersley stuff that I referenced in my presentation that you watched 6 times and know all about and know how it isn't analogous to what's being put forward at all? So let me get this straight, my dude. When you were watching this Prezi right here, you were watching old Battle of the Beams, and you came across Eckersley's work that's referenced and given to everyone, and the whole story about how he withdrew his calculations because they're not analogous and they don't work on a globe for line of sight radio wave propagation to guide a plane like that. That guy you talking about? You talking about Eckersley?
I mean, the guy who withdrew that specific proposed mechanism later after realizing how retarded it was? Is that the same guy?
You're talking about world-renowned Eckersley, who worked with Marconi on his famous radio wave propagation across the Atlantic, and then went on to do a bunch of other cool stuff that was just cited here, and actually revoked his calculations that he gave to Jones because he valued his professional career and didn't want to be the laughingstock of everyone.
Yeah, like, dude, when things are on the line, when it really matters, when radio waves are coming to stake, who are you going to call? Eckersley. Everybody knows that.
Yeah. Oh, you're talking about Eckersley, a man whose calculations aren't public and we can't even, we don't even know what he proposed. Guys, here's the thing. With all we have from the RV Jones story and all the other stories, all the other books that cover this historical narrative, all deliver the same story about how Jones met up with Eckersley and was like, "Hey, bro, I need some calculations to explain how this could work on a globe. And otherwise, no one's going to listen to me because they already tried to come up with a way to do this and they determined that it wouldn't even work on a globe. So they're not even going to, they didn't even try it. So they're not even going to hear me out." And Eckersley was like, "All right, dude, I got you. Hold on, let me get this napkin out." And he just writes out whatever equations. They don't say, "Oh yeah," and then he accounted for refraction, and that was, or then with enough diffract, nope, nothing. Or if we polarize, no, nothing. Nothing was proposed. Nothing was given. No calculations are provided. And when I questioned one of the authors, Tim Whipple, who wrote one of the books that cover this historical narrative about the calculations, he actually started by saying that he had seen these secret calculations, and he had a picture of them, and he was going to go get it for me. And then when I asked him for it again, he was like, "Oh, you know what? Actually, I might have been thinking of a different calculation, and defer to this." So he linked me to some thing from the British National Archive historical thing that cost about $45 to print the page, and you're not even guaranteed that the thing you're requesting is gonna anyway. That wasn't what we were looking for. And then he goes on to say, "Oh, you know what? It's actually just refraction." So no one's had any idea of the proposed mechanism for this ever. And that man wrote an entire book about it, and he has no idea what the official claim is because there isn't one. Because once you attach numbers to these things, you end up with these ridiculous kindergarten drawings, as was shown earlier. You end up with this scenario that's untenable for a globe. And that's really all that I have to say to end on this, because what was put forward here was very subpar in terms of reputation, in terms of information and technical detail and cool history stuff. 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. In terms of providing physical mechanism to explain any of this or give math to it and be better than what McKeegan's video was, 0 out of 10. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns about Battle of the Beams or how this would have worked?
Yeah, I think that the best way to refute it is to talk about it the way that it's not, and then have no one refute it, and then say it a couple times. And then I think if you can honor all three of those things, then you can refute it.
Yeah, that's really the crux of it. Throughout this whole presentation, the man never uttered the word beam geometry. Guys, you for the lads and ladettes that have been here through all the Battle of the Beams prezzies, what's the primary thing I'm concerned about arguing? It's the beam geometry of the equisect.
It's refraction from the bottom of the way. Are you sure? Are you sure it's not Earth curve?
So
Yeah.
what was it? What was his refutation on that? It couldn't have been that plane? What was the actual refutation?
The actual refutation was perhaps calling into question the measurement of the equisignal, saying it was perhaps bigger than it really was, which, okay, that's appeal to not what happened. And then, essentially, and it's just, and the second one was the accuracy of the system, saying that it just wasn't as accurate as we said it was, which is, fair enough. Okay. But he only gave the one example, which we already corrected multiple times moving forward after we were corrected on the narrative of how it played out. And in addition to that, he just proposes diffraction and refraction and says that he's going to provide more than just saying those words out loud. He's going to provide the calculations and the mechanisms.
Well, at least McToon pointed at the book, bro. I guess that's all I can say about that. I mean, that was more than what that guy put forth.
That was the worst debunk I've ever seen in my life.
No,
that was really horrible.
It was very subpar.
And what I thought was important is him saying, "I'm not poisoning the well," after he's been poisoning the well for 5 minutes. I thought that was.
He was like, "I'm not poisoning the well," but what this guy said is retarded. Therefore, everything he ever said is retarded.
Well, it means he was conscious. He was conscious of what he was doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, literally.
You know, and then he said that this plane went up there and just kind of randomly, willy nilly, was looking for stuff, but it turns out they actually had a pretty good idea of what they were looking
Yeah,
for.
I mean, really, that was his only gripe, right? They didn't know their ground or airspeed. Like, other than that, I didn't really hear, and that's not even legitimate beef because, say, like the British did nothing, and they didn't discover it till after the war, and they dug up the specs after the fact. That would have been enough, right? The technical specs. You wouldn't even need what the British did.
Where's my?
Right, because they did measurements that are way further than England is anyway. Is that correct?
And they
Yes.
went like 450 miles.
All right, so here's the reason we did benefit of the doubt elevations with this as well. This is extremely important here because we have this navigation system, this navigation beacon system on Mount Everest now at 38,000 feet. Does anyone want to take a guess on whether or not it's going to work and reach the target at Derby before hitting Earth curvature? It hits Earth curvature at 202 miles, 212 miles. 30,000 feet, it's still off. And also, in addition to that, this is another thing I wanted to talk about too, right? Because he mentions very cockily that he's like, you can, in addition to prefacing firsthand that this isn't just about math, this is an art form, and then it's about complex math, and he would rather just use simulations and software to do it. And you can go to any old swinging website and enter the values here and get whatever you needed. Oh, well, it just so happens we did that, dog. And throughout the whole thing, he didn't show any values for anything, any gradients. So in order to even make this work, you have to invoke a refraction gradient of 0.794. Standard refraction is 0.168. This isn't even a tenable position. No one's even ever measured this. It's not even proposed. This is a preposterous amount. This is just sliding the slider bar until it works. This has no physical meaning in reality. Sure, you can simulate it out. You can calculate it out. This is a real value that was calculated, guys, based on refraction conditions of those distances. No one has ever measured a refraction gradient of 0.794.
That's that refraction where you can get it and you can see your butthole.
Oh, dude.
Well, then there's the other thing. They appeal to diffraction too, right? You can't even model that out. It's not even. I mean, you could do it like in Maxwell 3D, but I don't think you could do it for. That's for like little teeny distances, right? Because you're modeling waves, right? So it'd be like a plane wave model of the E and B fields across, forever, right? Because you'd have to do it for each wavelength to even know how it would diffract in the first place, which is like impossible. And something you brought up that was important was what was the professor's name? Not Eckersley, the other guy.
Harvey Jones, the guy.
Yeah, Jones. So in the Secret Wars documentary, he says, I came up with my own system, but they denied it because of the same reason that they didn't believe him about the German system. Right. They denied his bombing system because they thought the Earth was a globe. So it's not like, this isn't like a one-off thing, dude.
Right. Yeah, super significant in that. And then the only time they've mentioned Earth curvature throughout any of this was when they get to the X-Garot system, which was more accurate. And they were saying because of the timing that was available due to the mechanical clock system that was used based off of, when they intersect with one of the three signals that they have to cross. But anyway, based on that accuracy, what they're talking about here by accounting for the Earth's oblateness, right, at the offset of that of the coordinate system, is basically they're talking about a left-right correction with respect to true north to get their bearing. That's all this is. This isn't.
They use the same document where the dude Control F like sphericity and found the one time it was mentioned and then was like, behold, here, look, I found it. See, you're wrong.
Hold on a second. They had to correct for oblateness in the northern hemisphere. Why? It's flatter there.
How dare you?
It's more curvy on the bottom, right?
How dare you, Indio? They're saying that at about the 45th-ish lattie, that's like where where jolly old England is, isn't it? Right around there. Anyway, they're saying around that area that they had to get what was it? 5-figure log table to calculate that bearing because the Earth is an oblate sphere.
Oh God,
Dude, like this is how they hook people, right?
man, an army of
Just
slide rules, right?
no proposed mechanism of how Earth curvature was defeated, but they definitely had to go left or right a little bit to account for it. Cool. Cool beans. All right. So I think that's pretty much
It's
everything
almost comical.
that I wanted to go over and touch up on. But that was what was put forward. So shout out to the lads over at the Drunk Debunk Show. Put that together. Look
Well,
forward to the next one.
shout out to Galatrax who made it digestible and cohesive.
Yes, big shout out to Galatrax who carried the torch, taking the notes, all that.
It was gruesome. I was there. I witnessed it.
I'm glad.
Check the old YouTube chat before we check out here. Liliana, if you're out there, we could use we need a brush tail babe in the voice chat.
Brush tail.
Yeah, you know brush tail, Lily. You ever heard of it?
Brush tail. Oh yeah. The best coffee in the world. Super duper. Brushtail.coffee. Folks, get your share before it's gone. Because the zombies have discovered it, the ETs have discovered it. Oh my God. So hurry up and buy your coffee while it's here.
Lily, are you saying people are coming back from the dead to try and get their hands on brushtail coffee?
Yep. Zombies and even non-zombie dead. Yep. I met a very sweet lady from the Victorian era. She wasn't a zombie, but she came out of the grave when I spilled a little bit of coffee on her tombstone by accident.
Oh my God, Lily. Are you
Yep.
telling me brushtail coffee has resurrection powers?
I think so. It's possible. I can't guarantee it, but I witnessed it. So what to do?
That's crazy. We're going to have to do some more scientific research and we need to get more people involved. So if anyone wants to get involved in resurrecting people from graveyards using coffee, go to brushtail.coffee and use the promo code apocalypse.
Yeah, it might be beyond the reach of science. That's the only problem. So anyways, but good luck.
Nice. Thank you, Lily. Much appreciated. All right, lads and ladettes, for the rest of the week, we have, what are we doing tomorrow night, Shane? Are we TikToking? Are we about to celestial theodolite some people tomorrow night? Or do we have something better to do? Shane is no longer here. Peace be upon him. TikTok tomorrow night, lads and ladettes. And then Thursday, we'll be heading over to Clubhouse where Man of Stone will be giving a custom Prezi on his shadow sets measurement using his window and a magnet in the old shadow created from the sun as it fades off into the horizon and or sets behind a globe. Tune in on Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern to see which of those turns out geometrically based on the measurements of the shadows. Then Friday, of course, will be a community Twitter space. And then Sunday will be Globebusters, where Zach will be doing a special presentation, all new material on the electrostatic gradient as a replacement for gravity. We're going to be looking at some new experiments and measurements to establish a possible cause and effect relationship, dare I say. Who knows? Who knows? Just tune in to follow the saga. See you guys tomorrow.
And I have a feeling that Dr. Heffron is going to come up with a new experiment related to this new topic on the new Globebuster.